Hello everyone, and welcome to Soft Stories. Today we are continuing our reading of Real Grit by Silas Hocking. We just finished chapter 25 last time, in which our good friend Jack Formby found himself with a new job, one in which inter-office relations were strained, to say the least. The work culture of his new employment is very different from the places where Jack has found himself in his past, but he seems to have been able to make a foothold for himself. What exactly that means, I guess we'll have to find out. So without further ado, let us continue with chapter 26 of Real Grit, The First Rung. Nick Whiffle was not the man to bear a grudge, and on the Monday following his encounter with Jack, he came to him during the dinner hour and held out his hand. "Look you here, Mr. Duke," he said. "I ain't no feelin' against you, nary a bit. You looked me in fair fight, and I respect you. You're the first man in these parts that ever done it, and you done it without no brag nor boastin'. And I like you. We can be friends, I take it, and atween us we can lick the camp. I can lick every other man, and you can lick me. From this day I'm your friend, and if you want help of any kind, ask Nick Whiffle, and he's your man." "It's very kind of you, I'm sure," said Jack, hardly knowing what reply to make to Nick's long speech. "I know you're not the same kind of cut as me," Nick went on, "but you're the neatest, grittiest chap as I ever come across. And I tell you again, if you ever wants help, I'm your man." "I'll not forget your promise," said Jack. "And what is more, if ever you need assistance, and I can help you, don't fail to let me know." "Agreed," said Nick. "You'll not always be a navvy. It's curious how you ever got to be one. From anybody with half an eye can see that you've had an education. I seed you were none of our set the moment I clapped eyes on you. But you'll rise, sure as eggs is eggs. A chap as does his work like you do, clean and no skulking, and with a headication to back him, is bound to rise." "My experience tells me it's much easier to sink than rise," said Jack with a laugh. "There now, I know it," said Nick with a broad grin. "I knowed you'd been something different. But don't you been downhearted, Duke?" "Oh, I'm not in the least downhearted," said Jack. "I'm healthy and strong, with plenty to eat and drink, plenty of hard work, and very few cares." Were it the drink, now, that toppled you over?" asked Nick in a confidential tone. "I've knowed several gents in my time, and it took off their legs in that way." "Oh, no, drink never harmed me that I'm aware of," said Jack. "I simply gave it up in the first instance when I found I could no longer afford it, and I've not taken to it again because I'm better without it." Well, that was sensible," said Nick, rubbing his chin. "I wish I had as much sense. It are quite true what you said about it being the curse of our camp. It were the curse of every gang of navvies I'd ever knowed. But law, I never knowed a chap as could hit as hard on water before." "You don't know how much harder you'd be able to hit if you drank nothing but water," Jack said, laughing. But Nick shook his head dubiously, and then, with a slow and measured step, walked away to his work. He did not soon forget his conversation with Jack, however, and before the next payday came round, he had formed a resolution to do without drink for a month, by way of experiment. Jack was soon one of the best-known men in the camp, as well as the most talked about. Everybody felt that there was some kind of mystery hanging around him. His fustian clothes could not hide the fact that he was a gentleman. His speech and manners were in direct contrast with that of every other navvy in the camp. What the mystery was, however, that shrouded his life, they could not penetrate. He was one of the most genial of comrades, always ready to lend a helping hand or do a kindly deed, but respecting himself and his past, he preserved an unbroken silence. It's true, there were not wanting those who hinted at some undiscovered crime of which he was guilty, but those who knew him most intimately scorned the idea. His fearless glance, his honest, kindly face, his genial smile, and ready courage gave the lie to every base suspicion or insinuation. The most generally received idea was that, through some love affair, he had been disinherited by his father and sent out into the world to shift for himself. "He's a plucky dog, anyhow," was the general verdict of his mates, and they admired him accordingly. That he should soon attract the attention of his employer is not to be wondered at. He was always at his post, always cheerful, and whatever his work might be, he did it well. Whoever might fail, Jack was always to be relied upon. Whoever might be late, he was always in time. What this cost him, no one knew but himself. He was not naturally industrious, while his training had been of the worst possible kind, but a great and lofty purpose sustained him, and a pure love that he tried in vain to crush out gave him inspiration in spite of himself. While lolling in the lap of luxury, he knew of nothing that he wanted, and though he was discontented and ill at ease, he did not know from what his discontent arose. But all this was changed now. The touch of a strong, pure love had first aroused his slumbering energies, and since then the demands of a stern necessity had spurred him on. To be a man in the truest sense was now his highest ambition. As life's meaning and life's responsibility began to draw upon him, he felt that he wanted to do something, and do something worthy. He knew that he had touched the bottom when an outcast in Liverpool. Since then, he had been gradually gaining ground, and when at length his master made him ganger over the set he worked with, he felt that he had got his foot on the first rung of the ladder, and that, by the help and blessing of God, he need not look back again. To the credit of his mates, it should be said none of them were envious of his promotion, they knew that he was worthy, and had well earned the distinction. While they had been often drunk, he was always sober, and while they had frequently neglected their work, he was always at the post of duty, and they had sufficient of the instincts of Englishmen to feel that his promotion was but an act of justice. It's true that the distinction of ganger was neither great nor striking. He was still one of them, and worked day by day by their side. Yet he was in a position of some authority and responsibility also, while he had a raise in wages of 10 shillings a week. Jack bore his honours with great meekness and with proper dignity. His mates had long looked up to him as their superior. They did so still, only now with a little more show of reason. It was very flattering to Jack to find that the men were so thoroughly at one with him, and that he had so completely earned their respect and confidence, especially when he remembered that up to the time of his encounter with Nick Whiffles he had been regarded as an interloper and a spy, and had been subjected to numberless petty annoyances. But his pluck and courage and skill that day had completely turned the tide in his favour, and today there was no more popular man in the camp than he. The chief contractor, Sir Francis Lashton, he had been recently knighted, did not often appear upon the scene. But his son, Tom, a young fellow of about Jack's age, drove over from Bradfield 2 or 3 times a week on average. He was a shrewd, yet apparently easy-going young fellow, with a careless and seemingly indifferent air, but, in reality, with a keen eye for everything that was taking place. He had been greatly interested in Jack from the first, and had watched him narrowly, though without appearing to notice him. And the more he saw of our hero, the better he was pleased with him. The story of Jack's encounter with Whiffle had greatly amused him, and he always regretted, he said, that he had not been there to see the performance. Up to the time, however, of Jack being made a ganger, he had never spoken to him, though he had long wanted an opportunity of doing so. But a few days after the occurrence referred to, Jack met him full tilt just at the entrance of the cutting, and touching his cap politely, was passing on when young Lashton stopped him. Excuse me," he said, with some little hesitation. "Your name is, Robinson, I think?" Jack nodded assent, but made no further reply. "You have recently been made a ganger, have you not?" he said, in the same hesitating tone. "Yes, I have had that honour thrust upon me," Jack said with a smile. "I hope you will not find it inquisitive or impertinent, but, to tell you the truth, I have been greatly interested in you for a long time past. Ever since, in fact, you gave that Whiffle a drubbing. I wish I'd been there to see you do it." It would scarcely have repaid you for the loss of your time," Jack said, colouring. "The truth is, there was very little in the affair. I was forced into it against my will. But there was no skill on Whiffle's side, and not much, I fear, on mine. He has length and strength, but he's clumsy and somewhat slow, and so you see I had the advantage." "I presume by that you have had some training in the use of gloves?" said Lashton. "A little," said Jack. "The fact is, most young men nowadays know a little of the art of boxing and fencing." "Oh, just so," said Lashton. "And, should I judge that you have had a good education?"
"Well," said Jack, "good is a relative term," he answered a little evasively. "Compared with most young men in my position, the word might be properly used."
Lashton laughed. "Come now, Robinson," he said at length. "That will not do. You're simply evading the question."
"Well then, I will answer straight and truthfully," Jack said with a smile. "I have not had a good education. Or rather, I am not well educated. I might have been, had I been more diligent."
"Why, I shouldn't have thought you had a lazy inch on you."
"Necessity is a stern master," Jack replied, "and I cannot afford to be idle now."
Anyhow, you have had better days," said Lashton.
"That will depend on what you mean by better," Jack answered, laughing. "I think, on the whole, I am more contented now than I have ever been, and I am certain I am more useful."
"But you have not always been compelled to work?"
Unfortunately, no. How to earn my living did not come within the scope of my education, and so I have had to learn everything since."
"And it's been a hard struggle."
"Rather. I had to find the bottom first, and that was the hardest part."
And you've kept up your spirits through it all?"
Scarcely that. I've nearly lost hope sometimes, but since I began to see my way, my spirits have gradually revived."
"And you hope for a better position than that of a ganger in time, I trust?"
"Yes, I do. Though, still, if nothing better turns up, I shall try to be content."
"Well, I must say, you're plucky, and deserve to get on. And my object in speaking to you just now is to offer you the position of bookkeeper in our office. I know you can do the work, and I would like to be your friend."
It's very good of you," said Jack, with tears in his eyes. "I thank you very much. But I think I would rather not accept your offer."
Not accept it?" said Lashton in astonishment. "And why not?"
"Well, I rather think I can learn more from where I am."
I don't quite understand you,"
Lashton answered. "Well, to be candid with you, I want to learn this business of railway making so thoroughly that, in time, should ever the opportunity offer, I might take a contract of my own account."
"Robinson, you're right," said Lashton, after a pause. "And what is more, as sure as I'm alive, you shall not lack the opportunity." And grasping Jack by the hand, he marched quickly away, while our hero returned to his work, feeling that in Lashton he had found a kindred spirit and a true friend. Chapter 27. A Narrow Escape. 12 months after the conversation reported in the last chapter, Jack Formby placed his foot upon the second rung of the ladder, with high hopes, though not without considerable fear and misgiving. He had invested all his savings in tools and plant, and had borrowed £50 besides. With these preliminaries he had taken the fateful step, and was now, in a small way, it's true, a railway contractor. During all these months, Tom Lashton had been a true friend to him, giving him frequently very valuable advice, and assisting him in every other possible way. And when, at length, a piece of work required to be done that was just in Jack's line, he sent in his tender at once, which was accepted. How much Tom Lashton had to do in this matter was never recorded. Jack required about 30 men for his work, and he calculated that he would be able to finish it in 7 months at the outside. Among the first to offer his services was Nick Whiffle, who had stuck to his teetotal resolution ever since his conversation with Jack, and was frequently heard to declare that he could not only do his work better, but that he could do better work on water than he could on whisky. Nick's resolution was not without its influence upon others, and many a man drank less, and a few gave up the drink altogether, through his and Jack's example. If Nick Whiffle, who could thrash any man in the camp with one exception, and the Duke, who could thrash him, were not ashamed of being teetotalers, there was no reason why any other man should be, and so the force of example told greatly, and as the weeks and months passed away, the camp became much less drunken than it had previously been. Jack had become so popular as a ganger and as a mate that he had no difficulty in getting 30 good men as there were in the camp. From the first, he took them into his confidence, and expressed the hope that every man of them would do his best. To this there was no demur. Indeed, every man amongst them declared that he would work as hard as though the contract were his own, and there was not one of them that was not true to this pledge. As the weeks passed away and lengthened into months, Jack's fears and misgivings gradually vanished. The work went steadily on without hindrance or mishap of any kind, and he saw very clearly that if the same good fortune attended him for a month or 2 longer, he would not only be able to repay the £50 he had borrowed, but would put twice the amount into his pocket. It was a bright, golden day in September, about 3 months after he had commenced his contract, when a circumstance transpired that affected him greatly. He was standing at the entrance of a short tunnel, giving some directions about a particular piece of work, when something attracted his attention. He could never remember afterwards what, and he stepped back a few paces from where he had been standing, when suddenly, and without warning, a huge piece of rock, weighing several tons, fell directly on the spot where he had stood a moment before. Had it fallen 2 seconds sooner, it must inevitably have crushed him to death. Such a narrow escape he had never experienced before. For a moment he was horror-stricken, and when he had recovered himself, he walked quietly out of the browning trees with which the whole district was covered, and when out of sight of his men, sat down on a mossy bank and gave himself up to reflection. Why was it that he stepped back at the moment he did? Was the question he asked himself. What was it that attracted his attention? Was it a mere accidental occurrence? A lucky escape? Or was there a providence in this?
If I hadn't stepped back at the moment I did, he said to himself, I should have been now a dead man. And what does that mean? Am I fit for death? Am I ready to render up to God my account of my life? Have I been doing my duty? God help me, I have not. I have been here more than 2 years, and have not been twice during that time in a house of prayer. My only thought is how to be getting ahead in the world, and I have acted as though I had no soul, and as though the men about me had no souls either. I wonder what Ada would think if she were to see me here. She would praise me, doubtless, for my energy and perseverance and industry, but how my neglect of all higher things would pain her. But of higher importance still is the question, what does God think of me? Surely it is in his mercy that he has sent me this warning. And all unconsciously he grasped his hands together, while the prayer escaped his lips, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And out of the silent wood came a whisper, as though a summer's zephyr shook all the myriad leaves about him and awoke them into speech. Go, stand, and speak to the people all the words of this life. Instantly he sprang to his feet and looked round him, but no one was visible, though the leaves were trembling still. Did someone speak? He said. Or was it all a fancy? Surely this narrow escape has upset my nerves, and yet, why did those words, of all others, occur to me? Now I remember. I once heard the vicar of Esserbrig preach a sermon from them when I was a lad. What a curious thing memory is. But what spirit was it that played upon my memory just then? I must think on this. And he wended his way slowly back to the works. But for the rest of the day, the words haunted him and would not be hushed. He felt as though he had stood upon the brink of death and had been suddenly called back again to life, and called back for a purpose. He had not finished his work, and God, in mercy, had allowed him to return, had given him another chance. I will go to church on Sunday, he said to himself, It will be a pleasant walk to Fernbeck village, and will be setting a good example to the others.
And when Saturday morning came, he started for the tramp through a regular downpour of rain. He felt, somehow, that to go to church was a religious act, and that was all he was expected to do. But all the while the words kept ringing in his ears. Go, stand and speak to the people all the words of this life. And when he had gone a mile, he felt it was of no use going further.
I shall not hear the sermon if I go, he said to himself. How strange that those words should haunt me in this fashion.
Then he began to debate the question as to whether there might be a higher duty in his case than going to church. What of these hundreds of men in the camp? Was religion just a question of looking after his own soul, or did it mean seeking the salvation of others? Might not that be the way to save his own soul? And the more he debated these questions, the more perplexed he felt. Again and again the prayer escaped his lips, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And always the same answer was given. He turned back at length and made straight for the camp. In a long, low, wooden shed that served as dining room, nearly all the men were congregated. It was too wet for them to venture out of doors, and the public houses within reach would not be open for several hours yet, and so they were willing to while away the time as best they could, some in conversation, some smoking quietly by themselves, and others engaged in card-playing and pitch and toss. Everybody looked up as Jack entered, for he was rarely seen on a Sunday, his usual custom being to stroll out alone into the woods and dream of other days and build his castles in the air. The old cognomen, the Duke, was rarely used now. Much more frequently he was spoken of as Maister Robinson. His own men spoke of him as the gaffer or the boss, but of his real name no one knew.
I thought I would look in and see on you this morning,
he said, seeing that every eye was turned on him, and everyone was waiting for him to speak.
I hardly know why I've come, but something has impelled me. You all know what a narrow escape I had on Friday morning.
Aye, aye, it were a narrow squeak, came from several voices.
Well, it's made me think of other things than mere eating and drinking and working, he went on. We are not animals, mates, we are men, and death is not the end of us. And I think we all of us ought to try more than we do, to live life as we shall wish we had when we come to the finish.
Aye, that's true, Gaffer, said Nick Whiffle. My mother used to tell me the same thing when I was a youngster, and she kept on a-saying it till she died. And the big giant wiped his hands across his eyes in unmistakable emotion.
I'm not much of a talker, Jack went on, but I used to go to church and chapel when I was a lad, and I know the Bible pretty well, and if you wouldn't mind, I could come up on a Sunday morning and read a chapter or two to you, and we might have a little talk together, and so encourage each other to live better lives.
Well, it's very kind of you, and it would be better nor lying and swearing here all Sunday morning any road,
someone said. I do not wish to do anything that would not be generally agreeable, Jack said. I don't profess to be better than you, but if we can help each other to be better, and encourage each other in what is good, I don't think we should regret it in the end. Likely not, said someone, but we don't want to go preaching here. If we wanted stuff of that sort, we could go to church. Could we? Someone said in reply. A lot thee knows about it, Bill Stuggins. If we were to go to church this minute, the whole lot of us, just as we are, the sexton had shut the door again us, and the grand folks had turned up their een and noses in horror. And the parson had sniffle and persuade us to go to some mission room or dissenters' meeting house. I knows all about it, for I've tried on more than one. At this there was a general laugh, after which Nick Whiffle spoke again. I think it a real kind of the boss to take us and care for us in this way, for nobody else does, and those of us who don't want to hear needn't listen, and those on us who do will find it a sight more sensible, I guess, than listening to a parson in his white shirt a-droning away up in his big salt box about what nobody knows nothing about but hisself. Well, that's a good un for thee, Nick, somebody shouted, and I'll be as one as'll be glad to listen, if the Duke'll give us a stave now and then. Well, suppose we take a show of hands, said Jack. That will be the easiest way of deciding it. This was no sooner suggested than carried out, and much to Jack's surprise, only 6 voted against it, though a great many did not vote at all. Jack felt justified, therefore, in commencing on the following Sunday, and beginning with St. Matthew's Gospel, he read straight ahead, pausing now and then to answer a question, or give a word of explanation. To a great many, the Gospel story was entirely new. To others it awoke memories of childhood's days, when they learned to lisp the name of Jesus at their mother's knee. To all it was suggestive of higher and better things, touching the fibres of their better nature, and responding to the deepest questions of their hearts. Thus, almost without note or comment, the New Testament was read through from beginning to end. It took Jack many weeks, but there were very few interruptions, considering the number of his auditors, and the free and easy character of the gatherings, while the attention was remarkably good, and the attendance steadily increased Sabbath by Sabbath. Jack made no attempt to expound the Gospels or Epistles, or to formulate a creed. His thought was, if this be God's truth, it will speak for itself, and every man will hear and understand that which meets his need. Perhaps he was not far wrong in that. But be that as it may, a change came slowly but surely over the lives of many of the men. There was less quarrelling, less drunkenness, less gambling, while a more gentle, generous, and forgiving spirit began to prevail, and to make itself felt throughout the camp. And it is there that we will finish our reading for today. It is not the Bible, but it is an interesting story, and one from which perhaps we can take something away. Even if not in the substance of the text, and in following Jack's example, which I must say that I had rather forgotten about until reaching that chapter. I've read this book several times, but
the forthrightness with which the author, who, as I mentioned at the beginning of the series, is a Methodist preacher, comes through in his text, feels slightly jarring to my modern eyes and ears. But I would love to hear what you all think of the interposing of the religious aspect with the story, the more traditional story of love and dedication. Do you feel like many of these stories contain, whether overtly or covertly, a religious aspect? Maybe they do. Maybe we can think up some examples together. I would love to hear from you, and I will address those points further when we continue next time on Soft Stories. Until then, thank you and goodbye.